Hi, and welcome to the Golden Age Timeline. I'm your host, C.M. Rieger, and today we're exploring a topic that I think many of us can relate to, feeling lost and unsure of our direction in life. But we're going to look at this from a different angle. Instead of frantically trying to find the direction, what if we allowed the direction to find us, for life to find us? See, we live in challenging times, as most people would agree. The world seems to be in constant turmoil, speeding up exponentially, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed or disconnected from our deeper purpose. But I believe these times of uncertainty also offer incredible opportunities for growth and transformation if we approach them with the right mindset. Times of challenge are usually the opportunity to become stronger, wiser, more resilient, innovative, and creative. If we're never tested, we never get to grow. And I know we know that intellectually, but sometimes when you're in the middle of a challenge or a crisis, it helps to remember that. So let's explore how to navigate periods of confusion or transition in a way that aligns us with our authentic path. We'll look at some interesting perspectives on the ego, identity, and our connection to higher consciousness, and we'll discuss practical ways to open ourselves to guidance from life itself. So let's start by considering what it really means to be lost or to lose our sense of direction. There's a beautiful poem by David Whyte that speaks to this. He writes, "Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes behind you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger. You must ask permission to know it and be known." I love this perspective because it reframes the idea of being lost. It suggests that perhaps we're not truly lost at all. We've simply arrived at an unfamiliar place that we need to get to know. And it invites us to approach our current circumstances, even if they feel uncomfortable, with curiosity and openness. David Whyte goes on to say, "Listen, the forest breathes. It whispers, 'I have made this place for you.' If you leave it, you may come back again saying, 'Here.' No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a branch does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you." Now, this last line really captures the essence of what we're exploring today, the idea that when we feel lost, the path forward isn't always about figuring everything out with our logical, linear minds. Sometimes it's about becoming still to let life, the universe, higher wisdom, whatever you believe in, to find us, to catch up to us, and to show us the way. Now, this might sound a bit passive or woo-woo or mystical, but I'd argue it's actually a very active and grounded approach. It requires us to cultivate deep awareness, to tune into the subtle signals and synchronicities around us, and to have the courage to follow where they lead, even if that doesn't make logical sense at first. To understand why this approach can be so powerful, it's helpful to look at the nature of the ego and how it shapes our perception of the reality around us. This ego construct, and I will call it a construction, while necessary for functioning in the world, isn't our true, complete self. There are two aspects of the ego. There's the lower ego, which is shaped by conditioning as we were growing up, traumas, and the limited beliefs we form because of those traumas. And this is the part of us that often gets caught up in fear, doubt, looping thoughts, limiting patterns of behaving. The higher ego is an expression of our authentic spiritual consciousness operating through this human form, this human avatar that we live in. This is the part of us that is aligned with our deeper purpose and connected to higher wisdom. So when we're feeling lost or stuck, it's often because we're overly identified with the lower ego. We're caught up in its fears, doubts, and perspectives from the past, trying to find solutions based on past experience when you're in a new place and none of your past wisdom and experience is helpful in this new situation. And from this vantage point, it's very hard to see the bigger picture and to trust that there is life unfolding in a new and different way, and we just have to be open to learning and discovering it as we go. But if we can shift our identification to the higher ego, which is connected to this source light of the higher self, some people call it the monad self, we open ourselves to a much broader field of possibilities, power, and guidance. It's an idea that's one of the themes in the novel Heliotropus, that we're a character in the video game of life. Just as a video game player has a perspective beyond the avatar they're controlling, the monad self might be controlling many different avatars. This monad self, this true self, has a perspective beyond this limited ego, boots on the ground self that doesn't have the past life memories or the bigger picture understanding of why we're even here, what we're doing, how we're making choices based on external cues instead of internal cues. So when we feel lost, one approach is to try to zoom out. You know, like you zoom out in a document and you kind of see what it looks like from far above and access that broader perspective. And ways to do that are to ask yourself certain questions, like thinking about your challenge that you're dealing with right now, or one of them anyways. Most of us have many. What if this situation, as uncomfortable as it might be, is actually part of a larger benevolent process? Or what if the very things that seem to be obstacles are actually guideposts pointing me in better direction? Or what wisdom or growth might be available to me if I approach this situation with openness and curiosity instead of fear and trepidation? So let's take an example that is common to many of the people I've coached over the last few years, losing their main source of income and finding, say, the cost of living going up at the same time, so faced with more intense scarcity than ever before. So here were 3 different responses to those 3 questions. You might relate to some of them, or you might answer them differently if you're in a similar situation, but just to help you see how it might work. So the first question, what if this situation, as uncomfortable as it might be, is actually part of a larger benevolent process? With one client, this question helped her see that losing 80% of her business could give her much needed time off after years of working 7 days a week. By asking herself this question many times, she started to relax into the process, trusting that life would provide if she was open to learning what was the benefit in this experience. What is a deeper benevolent process going on here? By shifting her perspective, she aligned herself with the here and the now, and out of that came a deeper purpose wanting to express itself. A new business, one that had lurked in the background of her mind for years, but that seemed impractical. It was the beginning of a much more fulfilling life and lifestyle, doing what she loved. So instead of building and maintaining websites, she was allowing herself to explore graphic design and learning some of the new tools on the market to take that graphic design to a whole other level of brilliance. It was the beginning of a much more fulfilling life and lifestyle, doing what she loved, and she had to move into a simpler lifestyle, which she ended up appreciating. It was less complex, less of a headache, less overhead, less pressure, and in a new location with new friends and colleagues who had similar values to her. And while the transition period was chaotic and uncomfortable at times, it led her to a new life that she now loves. So let's look at the second question. What if the very things that seem to be obstacles are actually guideposts pointing me in a new direction? So another client kept trying to break into a certain line of work as a freelancer in corporate communications, and every door seemed to close on him. In his spare time, just to relax, he started writing a memoir of some of his crazy life experiences, stories that seemed to fascinate friends and families when he told them. A year later, he published them and got invited to speak and be on interview shows talking about the book, and has an income now from something he thought would just be a hobby. Although it wasn't as much as he made before, a small investment he'd made years ago grew in unexpected ways, providing him with the extra income he needed to live. So by following his path and trusting life, life provided, as long as he was willing to learn and grow and let go of what he didn't need. So a third person found that her business partner in a real estate project started acting in strange ways, like blocking her suggestions, turning some clients against her, trying to wrestle control of the business away from her, or that's what it seemed. It was a business she had started and had invited him in due to his expertise in land use. Now he wanted to take the whole thing over from her and drive her out. But most of the existing clients were people she'd brought in. So that third question, what wisdom or growth might be available to me if I approach this situation with openness and curiosity? So mostly they'd been at loggerheads, arguing, threatening lawsuits, and super stressful. But this helped her calm down enough to see that it was just time for them to part ways so that he could run the business how he wanted and she could run the business how she wanted. But that required buying him out, and she didn't have the money. So she kept asking again, what wisdom or growth might be available to me if I approach this situation with openness and curiosity? Of course, we usually resist these questions at first, but, the deeper, higher mind loves to answer these questions if you just give it time. And, in the still hours of the morning, she awoke and had this idea that the quickest way would be to sell another parcel of the project. And that gave her the inspiration and courage to ask a wealthy person who she was sure would reject the offer that she'd been avoiding approaching. But this time she thought it through from a variety of perspectives and pitched the deal based on knowing this person's deeper needs and interests. And after several negotiations, he did agree, which allowed her to buy out her business partner. Now, finding solutions to these questions isn't always easy. Sometimes you have to ask these questions of yourself many times and let all your resistance come up until you're really allowing yourself to have this source-connected self-awareness. And ask it at different times really helps. Because when we're in the midst of challenging circumstances, it can be hard to access the broader perspective. We're often operating from our survival fight or flight brain where we're just worried about surviving. And that's why it's so important to have practices that help us regularly connect with this deeper, higher, monadic self that has the larger perspective on where your life's going and why you're even there in the first place and what you're supposed to be learning. Because I find as soon as you agree to go on the learning journey, on the adventure, usually life shows up with all sorts of support and synchronicities. So some practices that can be helpful, maybe you already do these. Number one is anything that relaxes you. But I would steer away from substances like drugs, foods, or drinks, as there's often a price to pay for that kind of relaxation. So look for something that allows you to create space between your thoughts so that the awareness can bubble up, allowing you to observe mental patterns rather than being caught up and owned by them. Like walking in nature, sitting quietly and watching your breath, any gentle kinds of movements like yoga or Tai Chi or something that requires a lot of presence that you can get out of your head and into your body, because a lot of our higher wisdom is more easily accessed through the body. Number 2, journaling. Writing can help us process our experiences, taking them out of the looping back brain and putting them on paper helps us kind of coach ourselves, kind of get outside ourselves and be a friend to ourselves, right? And often revealing insights we hadn't consciously recognized before. Like answering those questions I suggested, as they open up curiosity in the mind, and the mind wants to answer the questions. It can't help itself, the deeper mind. And number 3 is any kind of creative expression, whether it's art, music, dance, sport, anything that makes you have to be very present to do it. Because creativity and being really present in the moment bypasses our linear logical mind that's often worried about the future or regretting the past, and it allows this deeper wisdom to emerge. And number 4 is seeking out inspiring teachings or perspectives, whether it's listening to a podcast or a video like this, reading a great book, doing some sort of divination work, whether you're into pendulum or tarot or runes or whatever. Astrology can sometimes give you a broader insight into the paradigm you're trying to shift. Number 5 is breathing exercises can change your brainwave patterns and release you from the stressful beta waves, the survival brain thinking. And once you get into, say, the alpha, the theta brain waves, maybe even the gamma brain waves, you get into this more whole brain, deeper creative thinking. So the key with all of these is consistency. It's not about doing once at a retreat, once a year. It's like, I do them every day. Literally, I spend at least an hour every day doing something like this, even on days I don't want to do it, because it sort of builds the muscle of doing it regularly, so I can go there really quickly when I'm in a challenge instead of, taking 4 weeks of stress and beating myself up or whatever. I go there way more quickly and get myself out of it. Now let's look at another case study that illustrates how this approach can play out in real life. I'll call our subject Sarah to protect her privacy. But Sarah was a successful marketing executive. She was in her late 30s, and from the outside, she seemed to have it all, right? A high-paying job, a nice house, a long-term relationship. But internally, she felt kind of disconnected and unfulfilled. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the wrong path, but she had no idea what the right path might be. And the more she tried to figure it out logically, the more frustrated and stuck she felt. She made pro and con lists. She took personality tests. She read self-help books. She went to psychics, but nothing seemed to provide the clarity she was looking for. Things came to a head when she was passed over for a promotion she'd been really counting on. And this triggered a period of deep questioning and what she later described as kind of a dark night of the soul. She felt lost in every sense, unsure of her career, even her relationship, her purpose, even her identity. Like, what am I even doing with my life? And it was during this period that Sarah stumbled upon some teachings about surrendering to the wisdom of life, letting life find you. At first, her logical mind rebelled against the idea. How could she just sit back and wait for life to show her the way? But she was desperate enough to give it a try. So she started with a simple practice of 20-minute quiet walk in nature while doing some breathing exercises and just watching her thoughts. She left her phone behind and allowed herself simply to be present with her surroundings, That could be a fun thing to do, like I feel the sun on my face, I see the white flowers, I hear the crunch of the gravel under my feet. Sights, sounds, feelings can sometimes really get you in the present moment. And gradually, she noticed subtle shifts of doing this regularly. She became more aware of her habitual thought patterns of worrying about the future and regrets about the past and how they were keeping her stuck, or thinking that what she really wanted was impossible. That was the worst one for her. And she started to have moments of unexpected peace and clarity just by being in that observer mode rather than participating in the drama. And she began to notice little synchronicities and nudges from life that she probably would have previously overlooked. Like one day on her walk, she bumped into an old friend who told her about a volunteer opportunity that was focused on empowering people in developing countries through entrepreneurship. Now, at first, she just ignored it, but she started thinking about it over and over again, and something about this chance encounter felt significant to Sarah. So she found herself, a few weeks later, volunteering with the organization. And for the first time in years, she actually felt this spark of genuine excitement and purpose. And this led her, long story short, to teaching and coaching about entrepreneurship in various countries around the world, because she loved to travel and now she had a purpose and a reason. And the interesting thing is that Sarah didn't figure all this out through logical planning. Instead, she created space in her life to listen and to follow the subtle guidance that she received. And she described it as a process of allowing life to find her rather than trying to force a particular outcome. Now, this doesn't mean that the transition was always smooth or easy. Sarah faced plenty of challenges and moments of doubt along the way, like we all do, but she had developed a trust in the process and a connection to something larger than her limited individual ego, which helped her navigate the uncertainty. And that's just so important when you're in this period of uncertainty, loss, and chaos. Now, I want to clarify that this approach of letting life find you doesn't mean being passive or abdicating responsibility for your life. It's not about sitting on the couch waiting for inspiration to strike. Rather, it's about taking inspired action based on the guidance you receive when you open yourself to it. It's also not about ignoring, the practical realities. You don't want to be abandoning critical thinking. We still need to use our logical minds and deal with the concrete aspects of life. The key is to do so from a place of broader awareness rather than being solely identified with the limited ego self that tends to get lost in worries and is focused on scarcity. So this brings us to an important point about balancing different aspects of ourselves. So remember how we talked about the lower and higher ego. The goal isn't to completely eliminate the lower ego. I know there's lots of teachings that talk about that, but it serves an important function to help us navigate the physical world. But instead, the aim is to integrate and balance these different perspectives of our life. And this integration process, of course, isn't always easy or comfortable. It can be confusing because modern society programs us to live in a scarcity mindset and supports us to operate exclusively from the lower ego. And a lot of people do if you look around you. If you do teach yourself to operate from the higher self, the higher ego, you're often at odds with the majority of the people around you. And there's a great quote, though, by the Indian philosopher Krishnamurti. It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. So it often means taking the road less traveled, forging a path on your own. And it can feel lonely, and it can feel like a constant test of your faith in the right path for your life. In fact, it often involves facing aspects of ourselves that we previously avoided or rejected. This is similar to the process of cult deprogramming, because the culture we grew up in is quite literally a cult. If you've ever lived in another very different culture than the one you grew up in, you know how people view their cultural biases as unbiased truth. It's only through removing yourself from the water you swim in that you see your own programming more clearly. Although you may never have been part of like a guru's cult, there are cults you've been brainwashed by. Like, I spent 7 years in university and had to deprogram myself of some of the more harmful higher education programs and perspectives on life that I think were keeping me stuck. It was a matter of keeping what was useful and discarding what wasn't. We've all absorbed limiting beliefs, societal conditioning that can and do cut us off from our authentic selves. So there are several stages in the deprogramming process as we go through our own journey of reconnecting with our authentic self. And the first one is just building trust with this inner wisdom that I've been talking about. So I used to think only certain academics with PhDs held the right wisdom and perspectives to listen to. But some of those perspectives led me down a very wrong path, like thinking that lots of education would bring you a life of fulfillment. In my most fulfilling work, I've applied very little of what I learned in university, but university did teach me, say, how to research and self-motivate and how to write. Number 2 is educating ourselves about different perspectives and testing our assumptions. See, when I became an entrepreneur and let go of being an academic, I had to drop a lot of my ivory tower elitist views of people with lots of education to realize that street smarts could get you a lot farther in life, especially as an entrepreneur. Number 3, processing the emotions that arise as we challenge our old beliefs and patterns. Like, I had to drop a whole worldview of myself as this academic, get humble, go back to beginner's mind, and start all over again, learning things that others around me clearly had learned years before me. Basic things about surviving and thriving in the real world, being part of the world, experiencing other cultures, things I missed out on because I stayed 7 years in a campus setting in classrooms and libraries, learning things from books instead of from life. Number 4, gradually rebuilding our sense of self and autonomy based on our authentic values and purpose. So I needed to go it alone for a while until I got clear on what was my truth. And that meant actually separating from academic communities of people so that I could get out of what they call the egregores, the mind stories, the ways of thinking of those people, and be free to see things in a new way. And number 5 is developing practices and support systems to help us stay connected to our truth, even when challenges rise. So, for me, that meant getting involved in entrepreneurial communities and getting out there and getting the experience and making mistakes and learning from them. And as I said, I now spend at least an hour a day on practices to keep me connected to my truth, to higher wisdom, to universal truths, so that I can better navigate the challenges of this world. So this is deep work, and it's not always easy, but I believe it's pretty much the most important thing you can be doing. That time I spend doing that 1 hour of the day, feels in many ways like the most important thing I do that day, especially in these times of global transition and transformation. It's an inner anchor that really helps me feel more at ease and certain and secure. So there's a theory that I've talked about on other episodes that we're currently entering a 1,000-year period, a golden age. And that's, of course, why I call this channel and podcast Golden Age Timeline. It marks the end of thousands of years of inversion and moving back into a cycle of human evolution, which is the opposite of inversion. As this transition goes on, there's usually intensified polarity dramas, more conflict, more challenges on both personal and global levels, which is pretty obvious if you look out in the world and maybe in your personal life. But here's the inspiring part. It's during these intense periods of transition of an age of humanity that the opportunity for spiritual growth and evolution is greatest. It's a time when spiritual ascension teachings, for example, become available in a way they never were during the thousands of years of inversion. So our access to tools and perspectives to help us navigate these challenges is greater than ever before, because I believe many of us chose to come into a life at this time to go through this massive shift of an age, and to help others move out of the trap of inversion and into the flow of evolution again. Now, regardless of whether you resonate with this specific cosmology, I think this general principle is sound. Times of great challenge also offer great opportunities for growth and transformation if we're willing to do the inner work and stay open to new possibilities. So, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with some practical suggestions for applying these ideas to your own life. 1, create regular space for this stillness and reflection. As I said, this could be through meditation, time in nature, any practice that helps you quiet the chatter of the linear logical lower ego and connect with this deeper self or this higher ego self, whatever you want to call it. Number 2, pay attention to synchronicities, intuitive nudges, and moments of unexpected alignment in your life, like hearing a certain song or seeing a certain video or something a friend says in passing, or just this idea that comes to you while you're doing the dishes. These can often be subtle, so it requires cultivating a certain quality of attention and almost expecting those things to come to you. Number 3, when facing decisions or challenges, try zooming out to consider a broader perspective. Ask yourself these broad questions about what this situation might be teaching you or how it might be guiding you towards growth, that there's an underlying benevolence to it. Make that assumption and it will be shown to you. Number 4, practice surrendering your need to completely control an uncertain situation. This doesn't mean being irresponsible, but rather cultivating trust in the larger creative process of life that you're going to discover as you go on the adventure, that you can't know everything right now. Number 5, engage in regular self-reflection to become aware of your conditioned patterns and beliefs. Journal, work with a coach, use whatever methods resonate with you. Number 6, cultivate supportive relationships and communities, if you can find them, that encourage your growth and authenticity. And finally, number 7, stay curious and open to new perspectives and possibilities, because sometimes our next step comes from an entirely unexpected direction. Remember, the goal isn't to have everything figured out, it's to develop a trusting relationship with life itself so that even when you feel lost, you know that you're exactly where you need to be for your next step of growth and evolution, seeing life as an adventure, and as David Whyte so beautifully put it, stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. So thank you for joining me on the Golden Age Timeline. Until next time, may you trust the journey and allow life to guide you home. Bye for now.